Hi, I'm Meredith with the Cedar Rapids Public Library. Thank you so much for joining us for our panel on Candid Allyship. Tonight, our panelists and special guests are affiliated with PFLAG Cedar Rapids. With us this evening is Brett Hoffman, Eric Hoytka, and Jen Rore. So before we have our panelists introduce themselves in their own words, we have a prepared statement of gratitude. Thank you for creating a safe space for people to ask honest questions and for people to give honest answers based on their own experiences and maybe what they've heard others share. The format of this conversation will be several questions presented by the moderator and any that come from our community. And then there'll be a time at the end for questions from anyone else as well. Without further ado, I'll have the panelists introduce themselves. And Brett, if you don't mind, would you please start?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm Brett Hoffman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am on the PFLAG board within our Cedar Rapids chapter. I specifically run our transformations meeting, which is a support group for trans people or anyone across the gender spectrum in the Cedar Rapids or Iowa City area or any of our surrounding areas to kind of come together and establish a sense of community with one another and really provide support for each other. A lot of people come through and have a lot of different challenges that they're facing that are unique to them. And it's a really helpful group for people to just get together and talk about those challenges and get insight from other people within the trans community in the area about how they've dealt with these, how they have dealt with these issues, and kind of ways to improve their lives and really kind of get to a point in their lives where they are comfortable with themselves. So been happy to be a part of PFLAG now for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years at this point. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. Eric, do you mind going next?
Sure. My name is Eric Hoytka. Hi, everybody. I am new to PFLAG in Cedar Rapids area. I have participated here and there in different LGBTQ plus organizations throughout my many years. I'm about 50 years old. I come from the Central City area in Iowa, but I currently live in Cedar Rapids, but I spent quite a bit of time in California and San Francisco, where I got a lot of my life experience and my love for our community as it is and for bringing people together. I currently work in Cedar Rapids as an artist at the Artisan Sanctuary, and I am currently working on a few different projects, and one of them is specifically with PFLAG and transgendered folks in the corridor area to try and bring people together to do art and talk about what it means to be transgendered and or queer and or a lesbian or a gay man in the corridor area. So I'm excited to have a voice in the community here, and really looking forward to being part of PFLAG and everything else that Cedar Rapids has to offer for the LGBTQ plus folks.
That's wonderful. Jen, do you mind going next?
Jen, you're muted.
You are on mute, though.
And be polite. Hi, I'm Jen Rowry. I am 53, a lesbian and butch. I live outside of Cedar Rapids in Newhall, which I have for 20 years on my land. I have been out since the 90s, and I jumped in with head first with activism for the LGBT. Back then it was just LGBT. And then into the plus community. Visibility, accessibility for us to find each other, build community is really my passion. I have been president of PFLAG for about 5 or 6 years, and I've been involved for 12. When it first started, the second coming of the chapter here, there was 1 year ago that closed. I've also been involved in other things around the community. I am passionate about creating events like this once we can do in person, especially for people to meet each other. And that's PFLAG's been a driving force for that to allow people. We do run a support meeting the first Wednesday of every month at the Artisan Sanctuary. It's a great space where we meet, and it can parents, friends, it really focuses on families and the dynamics of the LGBT community within that dynamic, but we also are a support group for the LGBT plus community if that's what's needed. We are a very open and welcoming space. Not that we don't have hard conversations. I'm really big on people being able to speak their own language to communicate, and if they're willing to learn with good intentions. So that's me.
Wonderful. I think that if it's okay to start with kind of a bigger concept of allyship, right? I feel like sometimes when I hear allyship or being an ally, sometimes it makes me feel like if I'm or if I'm going to be an ally, I am different somehow than the person that I'm seeking to help, support, and uplift. But I don't think I think that's a misconception, starting here. I'm wondering, we have 3 really interestingly diverse experiences of people that identify as part of the LGBTQ community. Different ages, different identities. Do you mind going back around in order, maybe? Or you don't have to go in order if you don't have a comment, certainly. But my question, I guess, is there a time that you can think of when someone has demonstrated being an ally to you? Okay, pause. And then the other side too, like an example of how you have demonstrated allyship, which a lot of it comes through in your conversation or in your introductions, but a specific time when you've been an ally to someone in the community. So, and anybody who has an answer first can jump in.
Sure. I can go first again.
Please.
So I used to work at Collins Aerospace. I had come out when I was at Collins. I worked there for about 1.5 years, I think, after I came out of school, before I had finally gotten to a point in my life where I was able to come out in the office. And it was definitely a challenging experience, especially just because I worked on the military side of things in Collins. So just by nature of working in that side of the business, there were a lot of people who tended to vote more red, I guess. It's a very polite way of saying it. And so there was a lot of, I had a lot of anxiety about coming out in the office, and especially about how those people would react. But I think for me, experiencing allyship in that regard, my team members for the team that I was working on were really great as I was coming out. A lot of people were really, very adamant about switching pronouns right away. A lot of people were very adamant about sticking up for me and correcting others in the office, especially in meetings that I wasn't a part of, and really being an advocate for me. So, when I think about allyship, I think that's probably something that to me has been the most impactful, especially I think just because work was such an anxiety point for me in terms of coming out. I think it was definitely one of the areas of my life that I was the most worried about bringing my full self to. And so, I really appreciate the fact that I had so many wonderful team members that I was able to work with, and people who, really stood up for me and helped, spread that acceptance to the rest of the office. And I think in terms of showing allyship to others, I think generally, just being a part of the transformation group has been something that's been really helpful to me. I guess I don't have as many like specific examples of that, but one of the things that has been really important to me is we've had a lot of people who have come through transformations. I initially started going to transformations. I was not the leader of this group. So it was, a group that I had initially gone to when I was first figuring out my life. And it's been something that's been really helpful to me. And so being able to give back to my community and see people who are in the same state that I was, 4 or 5 years ago, where they're very much at the beginning of their journey. They're very much still figuring out what it is exactly their identity is and how they want to express that. And being able to work with them and share a lot of really great resources that we as PFLAG as an organization have been able to come up with. We have a great book list of all sorts of different books written by different people that really help push forward and help people kind of understand their identities. We have a list of I've been building a list of queer friendly therapists in the area. That's been really helpful to a lot of people that have come through our group, and it's just been really rewarding to be able to share resources like that and hear back from people and have them say these things help me so much in terms of figuring out the direction that I want to take my life and how I want to live my life to be truly happy. So I think that's something that has been really rewarding for me personally to be able to be a part of.
I think it also really speaks, it's like a testament to the group and the work that everyone does within that group, not just the facilitator.
Yes.
too, that you're like,
absolutely,
to have come from a place where you've been a participant to the leader. I mean, it's just, I love how you support one another, and that continues. You know, it's like, it just keeps rolling, and that's lovely.
I am certainly not the only person who has helped people at transformations. I'm just the person who kicks off the meeting. I just do the PFLAG spiel at the beginning. There's so many wonderful people who have come through our group that have, you know, perspectives and identities that are different than mine, and have experiences that are different than mine, and are really able to help out, you know, other people in a way that, you know, I maybe wouldn't be able to help out that person. So, you know, it is definitely really nice to be able to foster an environment like that where, you know, even if I'm not directly helping people, others are helping one another. And it's really rewarding to be able to see, you know, to be able to foster an environment like that, for sure.
I guess I can speak next, if that's all right, Meredith.
Please.
So I just, first of all, I'm really happy to be a part of anything that helps people to understand each other better. I love that we have, you know, we do have quite a few labels in our world these days to identify who we are, and to identify with other people who are like us. But the one thing that I always go back to that really is the most important for me is going back to the most basic level of who we are, is being humans on this planet together. And that the labels are there to help us kind of seek out each other and also to identify ourselves. But what I found to be the most helpful for me when I approach any kind of allyship is that I approach them as a human being and try to meet them where they're at, instead of approaching them with any kind of, if I don't understand, I'm willing to understand. If I don't have a knowledge of something, I'm willing to be open to learn about that. And so I find that the best allyships that I've been a part of, or even have heard about people engaging in, are those that start at the human level and say, where are you? Who are you? And what can I learn about you? So that I can be less fearful of the world around me because I understand you better. I think that's part of the reason there's so much fear in our world, is that we just don't understand each other. And we're sometimes not given the opportunity to understand each other, or don't take the time to understand each other. We make assumptions. And so I find that these partnerships that are created in all these different groups of people, not even just in the gay community, but at the world at large, really do impact how our world operates and how we see each other. One of my best probably memories of an allyship. And so I'm almost 50 years old. So I came from a time when, first of all, to have an allyship at a young age, it makes me so happy to be in a world where we finally have let, you know, young people engage in conversation and feel comfortable saying, I'm gay, or I'm a lesbian, or I'm transgender, and have it. Yes, it's still difficult for some people to accept, but that there's a lot more acceptance around it. When I was growing up, I would have given anything to have somebody to talk to not feel so alone, and to feel like I had to hide my true self because nobody wanted that. Nobody wanted to hear about that, because at that time it was still considered a deviant behavior. It was still considered a person who you don't interact with because they're not part of the normal society. And so it really was lonely. And so I remember my very first time going out to a gay bar when I was in Kansas City, is where I moved to. And that night I was terrified because I'd never been around people of my own. I had moved from Iowa, where I just hadn't have any kind of idea what it was like to be a gay man in the world. And I moved there, and I remember the first night I went out to the bar, and these two men approached me, and they were much older than me, and I was terrified and also excited at the same time, because I felt like they were coming to connect with me, but I was terrified because I didn't know who I was. And they really created an allyship with me in that very moment, and became what we call it back then, we used to call them gay dads or gay moms. They really became a mentor to kind of help me to find who I was within our community. And the one thing that I haven't done myself, and I'm really learning to give back to our community, is to be that kind of mentor for anybody, whether they're in our community or just another human being, to say, I've been some of the places you've been. I can guide you. I can be there for you if you let me. I can be open to your experiences and learning from you, even, because I don't know it all, and I won't know it all until the day I die. And so I just really believe in this kind of human connection, where we're not only given the opportunity to speak with one another in a candid and safe way, but that we're also given the opportunity to be ourselves without any kind of repercussions or worrying about our safety or those kinds of things that I had to worry about growing up. And it made me it made me who I was, and I am now, but it was so hard at that time to not have anybody to talk to and to not have even a single friend in high school that understood who I was, and or even after high school. So just hearing all these wonderful stories and all these, gay straight alliances and the transformation groups and the things that are happening with transgender people in the United States. And we have this learning curve where we're learning about each other. And I don't always get it right, even still, but I'm trying to learn. I want to be open and I want to understand everybody, because that's where the real humanness comes in. That's where I feel like our allyships can really be powerful, in who we choose to let in and how we expose ourselves and be vulnerable to those around us.
Well said. Well said. Jen, do you have any examples you'd like to contribute?
I do. Same. I went to a small high school. I went to Solon High School in the 1980s. There's no way I could have come out. I just really kept myself. I felt very isolated, like I was only one. Something was wrong with me. There's all these things. I went to Camp Wapsie, and there was a counselor named Chris who was very clearly a lesbian. She had the hiking boots and the cargo shorts, and she always wore a cowboy hat, and she always had a smile on her face. And she kind of, without outing me, was very gently there for me and kind of was like, you and me are a lot alike. And she was right. She was a very happy person. She was always telling jokes and kind of just always in the upbeat. There was never a time when she couldn't look on the positive side. And she made it sound like she was talking about that, but really what she was talking about was we shared that common sexuality, and she was letting me know it's okay. And when other kids, and I didn't get picked on a lot, I wasn't popular, but I had a good enough sense of humor that I wasn't picked on too much. But sometimes the boys would kind of get at me because I had no interest in them and I didn't care what they thought. And that is a big no-no at camp when you're like 14. And she was very candid about telling them to knock it off or leave it alone. So she kind of stood up for me. And then that morphed as I got older and I came out. My first girlfriend was really one of my biggest allies. She walked me through coming out, understanding being butch. As a masculine woman, I had no idea that another woman would find me attractive or even think that I was part of a community. And she really taught me it was okay to be like that. And then she introduced me to a massive amount of lesbian friends who are still my friends today, who kind of then introduced me to their families who were supportive. And my mom and dad were fine. They were okay. But that was the first allyship I had, was Chris as a camp counselor. She was really there to kind of stand up for me and show me that I was okay. As far as in the straight world, really not until a little bit later, and that would have been PFLAG. When I was kind of before I even came out, I used to see them in the parades, and we didn't have a local chapter where I went to college in Missouri, and if there was a chapter, I wouldn't attend it anyway. But I would see them in the parades, and people would be hugging them, and they would have stopped the parades to hug the parents of PFLAG because they were supportive. We knew that we could it was the parent that was supportive without any questions. And so realizing that a group out there of strictly made up almost strictly by parents or relatives of gay and lesbian people at the time really meant a lot. It meant that there were adults, even though I was a legal adult at 19 or 20, there were adults that were out there standing up for us kids. And in my head, even though these people were probably in their 30s and 40s and 50s, to me, they were the grown-ups, and that was really cool. For me to be an ally, my passion is creating space for everybody. And I'm not talking all at the same time always. Sometimes it's important for people to find others who are just exactly like them or close, that they can have confidence in talking to. So one of my biggest ally works has been to talking to people, whether they're trans or bi or gay or lesbian, and finding out what they want out of their community separate from the rainbow. So while the rainbow is great and I love it, and I love going to things like Pride and gay bars and stuff, sometimes people and transformations kind of, and I didn't start transformations, but I certainly wanted it to grow and be bigger than it was at the time, because I think people need to talk to people that are most like them. And it's okay for people to set boundaries and say, and a lot of trans people are finding themselves kind of stuck in the LGBT and having these conversations with people that didn't really understand what they were talking about. the same as with bisexual, specifically bisexual men, but bisexual women as well. There's a lot of things that swirl around them, and they don't have allyship. A lot of bisexual women are married because they didn't come out till later in life. They're married to men. A lot of bisexual men don't come out, and they're told, you know, are you sure you're not gay? You know, all these things. And they don't really have community. There's no cohesive bi community. So I've created a couple of small events to get them together. And it's hard sometimes because they kind of fall on that cusp. They feel comfortable sometimes in lesbian spaces, and they might be on the gender spectrum. So they feel comfortable also in these other spaces. But I wanted to, you know, I've been really, really push the idea that we all kind of deserve to set our own boundaries with people that we want to communicate with. And I think it's really helpful when you can start a conversation in the middle. You don't have to explain all the background and everything that you have. Here's what led up to this. Now here's my problem. You can just say, here's my problem. And everybody in the room has a kind of at least somewhat of an idea what that's. So that's how I present my allyship. That and social media. I started a Tumblr page because I was, I don't know, I was crazy. I don't know what I was thinking, but I started a Tumblr page just for the heck of it. And I was very much having way much fun with it with my 4 people that followed me. And I started getting DMs. I've never met an older lesbian. I've never met a butch that's happy. I've never met, their only exposure to butch lesbian is Leslie, who wrote Stone Butch Blues, which is not relatable to 80% of young butches. They're like, I'm happy and I don't feel like I should have all these problems. So my thing was on Tumblr, I started to get DMs because people really needed to see and have access to older lesbians. And then that transferred into TikTok, and I started having really a lot of fun with TikTok, and I get DMs almost on the daily that they've never seen an older butch lesbian that's just like surviving and not just surviving, but thriving. So that has been my outreach right there, is to be there where I had an empty space. I want to fill that space for the other generations. Okay, I'm done.
Well, I think I'm just overwhelmed with like interest and appreciation for all the different ways in which you each have spoken to how you see individuals and how you are so purposeful in your ways to validate and see people where they're at, to connect them to people that are like them, but also create a space where hard conversations can happen, or things that make you uneasy can happen, with the bigger goal of bringing people together, whether it spans generations. And I think that's something that is really important to acknowledge too, how this generational, like just because we're all getting older and living a little longer, but also because so many more people have felt comfortable enough to come out. And there is an older community of LGBTQ people everywhere. How I personally just really appreciate how you're trying to connect people generationally, and, you know, just provide even a different space, like you said, for like older butch lesbians. Like having those spaces for older adults are just as important for people figuring things out, because their high school was small and now they're in college and the world's opened up, right? I have a quick question that's a little bit of a backpedal, but something that I was thinking while you were all speaking is, do you feel, and you might not have an answer to this because it's a little on the philosophical side, but can you identify perhaps the difference between what allyship and advocacy are as you see it? And it can be a personal and like opinion. It doesn't have to be like, well, according to Webster's, you know, but I mean, are those two different things, or do they go hand in hand?
I'd like to speak on that just a real quick. I think that to me, they go hand in hand, but to me, the difference is allyship is like reaching, a lot of times it can be specific, but I find that allyship tends to be a more general, broad term about reaching out to groups and people, although Jennifer has made it a point that it sometimes is a one-on-one, and I really appreciate that too. Advocacy seems to be to a specific topic, to a specific group or individual. So we're advocating for your rights at this particular company, And so we're here to support you, whereas maybe an allyship would be for the whole company to get more information about diversity. Things like that. That's how I see the difference anyway, and what it is for me.
I think that was a great practical example. Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with everything that Eric had just said. I think allyship, to me, I think is almost a kind of a more personal, I guess, experience. Like allyship is almost more like you're having like a sort of a one-on-one interaction with someone, or like to go back to like what I had talked about, in terms of like people speaking up for me in the office and like correcting people on pronouns and stuff like that. Like allyship to me feels like it's something where you are being very direct in terms of like making sure that a specific person or like a specific group of people is being respected, and then advocacy I think is definitely more along the lines of pushing for greater change, I think on more of a generalized scale, of like going to like Pride, or like sending letters to like your representatives and talking about like, hey, our state doesn't have good support for queer people, and I think that we should change that. Like to me, that's kind of what advocacy is. But I think the two terms really kind of blend together in a lot of cases. Like where you can, in most of those cases, I feel like you can really kind of almost interchange advocacy and allyship. But at least to me, that's kind of how I think about the terms.
That's great. My next question, because our panelists are all from Cedar Rapids area, I mean, most recently specifically, my question is, and you don't have to, I'm trying to think of the way I want to phrase this. You don't have to point out any, perhaps like problem areas, but from your perspective, and whether it's personal or some of the people that you've interacted with most recently, where do you feel like the best opportunities for allyship to take place in our community could be? Right? This is a big question. Yeah. It's a very big question, but in terms of, it could be within local organizations or whatever, but like churches or schools or however that looks. Like, what are some of the places that you feel like are not most deserving, but would benefit the most from allyship taking place?
I have a couple initial thoughts, and I hope I'm not jumping over people and just railroading anybody. I tend to talk a lot, but I just really want to speak to that, because for me, so just a little bit more about me. I am a recovering addict, and I was an addict in both San Francisco, where I lived for many years, as well as San Diego, and then also even a few years here. And I found that when I was trying to get sober, and just within our own community, trying to find things that were not involved in any kind of bar or like something that was done just for the sake of being together in an environment outside of the bar or outside of a party or outside of an event, that I was like, and I know that there's some of those things kind of starting here, or things have started and I don't even know about them because I am new to the city. But I feel like in most rural small towns in America, there's this kind of, we're kind of still relegated to bars and events, and although we are way more accepted, I feel like there could be more of that. But even more so than that is, I feel like an area where every community, every LGBTQ plus and community across America, is that we need to do some work within ourselves, because so many years we fought for rights in order for the world to perceive us and to take us as a human being. And now that we have that, it's like in our community, I feel like we could do more to really understand each other, because there have become in certain areas these pockets of people that we have categorized people to so much that people are not allowed to be around certain groups, or they don't feel comfortable because they talk bad about the other groups, just even within our community, or they don't understand the other part of the community, and they want to be a part of, but they feel like they're ostracized, or they're put down for not understanding a part of that community. one of the biggest learning curves for me has been the whole idea of pronouns. I am a very open guy. I want to understand more in detail how I can make people feel comfortable in their identity when I approach them and when I address them. And sometimes I've gotten it wrong and I feel horrible. And I feel like at the same time, there's a learning curve that happens, especially with the older generation, in which we kind of have to understand, there has to be kind of a grace period, as it were, to allow us to get this kind of new lingo and this new identification with people in our own speak, so that when I approach somebody, I understand that people might get offended, but that they also take that moment, like I would, to educate. If somebody doesn't understand me, I will take the moment to educate and not be upset, but to educate them and to help them understand me better, so that they don't. So I feel like they understand, and that even if they got it wrong in approaching me, that they feel like we came to an understanding in the conversation, and then I didn't feel all of a sudden I was shut out because I didn't address a person correctly. And it's not just with pronouns. I think just in general, I think, again, going back to this idea, for me, is it's all about understanding. And if we don't understand each other and we don't meet people where they're at and allow people some leeway, we do ourselves a real disservice in allowing people to be themselves, because we're immediately shut off. And then I think, oh, I didn't get it right, so I'm not going to try that again. Then I might not try it again. I might not try and learn, and I might be shut down in that way. So I think that's something that is a learning curve, that's just because it's kind of just becoming part of our world more, even though trans people have been around forever. It's just we're now being able to find a way to help them identify and help, and then also for us to help them along on their journey by being respectful of how they want to be identified as. And sometimes we're going to get it wrong. And there are sometimes when I see somebody who, looks more what we'd say feminine traits, and I don't want to be rude and say, so I might not use the pronouns correctly, and they would get upset. And I truly don't want that to happen. I want to understand. So for me, it's about education through the community, even to understand more. And I think things probably like transformation, I haven't been to a meeting yet, but I intend to go, is a place where I could learn that more. And I think getting more people on board with that would be really helpful, just from a standpoint of us older folks who maybe aren't or just who I feel like are just learning for the first time some of this stuff. And even though you've been a part of our community forever, I feel like I want to be respectful. And in order for me to do that, I need to understand it better.
Yeah, absolutely. Jen, did you want to go? Yeah. Sorry, I totally lost my train. Can you ask the question again? I totally lost my train of thought.
It was so long ago in all of our thoughts. I had a moment where I was like, I'm going to have to ask somebody a question again. What was the question? I'd ask myself. But the question was really long and complicated, and it could have been way more efficient. Where do you feel like some of the most crucial spots for introducing allyship in our community are?
Yeah. I've been thinking about it, and then I started talking immediately. My brain just shut off. Yeah, I think kind of going off of Eric's point, I think especially since for such a long history of the LGBT community and the queer community in general, like so many of our meeting spaces have been based around, areas where people are drinking or using substances and things like that. Like we have such a large population of people who have a cross section of identity of being either a current addict or a recovering addict, and having that cross section of identities with their queer identity, and so I think a great area for increasing allyship and sort of increasing knowledge of these things is especially places that are helping people who are recovering from these things, places where, like housing or rehab centers, and, places where people are trying to get help, where they're already dealing with something that's, incredibly challenging, already like such a intensely personal, difficult journey to go through. That having someone not respect who they are or not understand who they are really just adds like that extra layer of stress on top of it. Like these people are trying to, make a change in their life to become healthier and take better care of themselves and make a positive change in their life. And that's really hard to do when they are not being respected properly. And so I know, like, especially with transformations, we've had a lot of people who have come through and have had, situations similar to that, where they're trying to get better, they're trying to get healthier, and they're just struggling with staff at these places where they're at, where the staff just doesn't really understand or is unwilling to understand. So I think places like that are really good areas to kind of bring that advocacy, and kind of branching off of that. I think just any area that's kind of dealing with intersecting identities, like queer people with disabilities, or like queer people of color, and specific arenas that are maybe based for like people of color or for people with disabilities. Making sure that those spaces also recognize like the intersection of those identities with their queer identities, and making sure that maybe somewhere where they're helping people understand their disability and understanding how to cope with it, and different things like that. Also making sure that they're respectful of those things. I think kind of going back to the addiction idea, like people are already trying to overcome these incredible personal challenges and these incredibly difficult areas in their lives, and when they're not respected for who they are as a human being, it really just makes that journey that much more challenging. So I think making sure that spaces like that are really kind of catering to a cross section of identities are really important to make sure that we're focusing allyship in those areas, to make sure that not only their one part of their identity is taken care of, but also that the queer part of their identity is also respected, and they feel like they can bring their entire selves to these areas.
Right. I'm glad you said that. I'm just going to say one last thing. First of all, that was very succinct, and that's what I meant to say. But the other thing is, I get very superfluous with my words. So the thing is, and attached to that is that I think there's lots of opportunity for us to do this. And I think just even what I've seen in this community, I want to bring more of that, where people those who are recovering addicts get to have meetings, regular meetings with people in the community in a safe space that does not include alcohol or the potential for drugs. I think having, as much as we can, make it a safe space, so those things aren't even there's other spaces for them to deal with those kinds of things, but bring them into a social arena in which they can start working on themselves as a member of the LGBTQ+ community, without having to worry about the pressure of, are there going to be drugs here? Is there going to be alcohol here? Am I going to have to fight that in addition to trying to get to know people? So I really feel that's one allyship that could be, and maybe it is growing, I hope so, but I would like to be a part of making that happen more, because as a recovering addict, there are times when I want to join and do something, but it's at a bar and I'm like, I'm not an alcoholic. It wasn't my drug of choice, but I still don't trust myself. Where there's alcohol, there's usually some sort of drugs, and there's some sort of, there's a lot of gateway things that can happen. So I have to really limit myself sometimes. And so I just feel like, yeah, we could do more with that. And I would like to be a part of making that happen as well, to create that allyship.
I kind of speaking all around that, I am a very social person. Back in the day, we used to have, and it was usually centered around bars, but not always. There were lesbian softball leagues, dart leagues, bowling leagues. Like you put a sport together and say it's lesbian, and you're going to have just we had there was 8 teams in Iowa City at one point. Like we had these huge, and it was alcohol because the bars always had the pool table. But at the softball games, they didn't allow alcohol. They were done. And there is an LGBT, I don't know if they call it queer or LGBT plus sport league here in Cedar Rapids. They're based out of Cedar Rapids. They fell by the wayside a little bit with COVID, but they are up and running. And part of what I would love to see happen, and I actually started working on it kind of in the middle of COVID, but just with stuff in my life, and then with Lori, who I was working with, I would love to see an intramural sports league, not anything serious, volleyball. Anybody can play volleyball. You can play it with kids, and kids need to see older lesbians, older gay men, older trans people. They need to meet. And the safest way to do that is on a volleyball court. You can have 6 people play. Adults can tone it down. Everybody can bounce a ball around. You can play, beach rules or whatever. There's that. There's always things at the state, there's parks that have like horseshoes. And that sounds ridiculous, but it's not the event. It's not what you're doing. It's doing something to allow conversation and comfort. So you don't feel like you know, I'm being this creepy older lesbian because I'm hanging out with some 20-year-olds, you know, and it's like, but on the other hand, they're like, I don't want to hang out with an older lesbian and make them feel like I need a mom or I need a sugar, you know, they don't want to play that game either. They just want to hang out. So it's like, if you have a thing to do, and that can be something very social. I talked to Meredith about a book club, just some kind of action that is social that allows you to get together with other generations and of the whole rainbow chorus, because that's where it's important. I would love to see the fruition of a volleyball, intramural volleyball team that's crossed ages, you know, maybe 14 up or whatever, or even softball or dodgeball or any event. And not that long ago, you know, a lot of prides used to have things through the summer, but they just don't have the staff, they don't have the volunteers, and they don't have the energy, and they don't have the funding. Although it's, if you do it right, it doesn't cost really anything. And I know that Eric is putting together art stuff, which is great around here because winter's coming, and you know, softball's gonna be out. So yeah, and the bars were important to my and Eric's generation. Like when I was 18 or 19, before I was even out, when we would go to a bar, and I went to my first gay bar, I think at 19, and it was in Quincy. It was a little bar, and they let you in the back. They let you in. They didn't even card you because they knew that that was your only place that you could go where you could kind of be out and be safe. So a lot of bars were kind of like putting themselves at risk by allowing younger people in. And I've talked to women my age or a little bit older than me who were allowed in bars at 14. Just don't drink, but you can come in, because it was the only place that they were safe, that they could be themselves. So bars were and still are incredibly important. And I hope they don't go away, but we need to have alternatives to social and where we can interact with, you know, younger people and have that feel safe. Lumen, sorry, that's my dog.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jennifer, and what you were just saying is that is probably one thing Jennifer and I have in common, because of our age and also because we both have passion around it, is this idea of intergenerational education. And I find so often that, so I lived in Iowa City for like the last 6 years, and it's all, you know, 18 to 21-year-olds. And I found this really amazing thing down there that half, I would say any of the young adults they interacted with had no idea who Harvey Milk was, or what the Stonewall riots were, or even cared about how they got to be at the point where they could walk down the street hand in hand without being too afraid to do so. And that's just one aspect of it. But this understanding, for not only for them to understand what has come before them so they could be who they are, but also for us as the older generation to understand now where they're at and meet them where they're at and see if there's anything we can do to kind of bring us all together and feel this community that at a time when Jen and I were growing up, we had to have that. It was the only safe place we could be, that we could really be ourselves. And now that everybody's kind of spread out, there isn't this like immediate need, because there's safety everywhere, more so than there used to be. And so it's like they kind of look at the older generation as, you know, they're just trying to get their way with me, or they're trying to impose their old ways on me. It's the same old generational argument. You know, the older generation doesn't think the younger generation stands, and the younger generation doesn't think the older generation understands. And the truth of the matter is, we don't, only because we don't take the time. And I think that's something that I really truly am trying to do with any things that I'm doing in the community and just the world at large, is that I'm trying to bridge the gap, band the gap between the human experiences of younger generations and older. And I think, as Jen said, any way we can do that is outside of the bars is great. I do hope the bars don't go away, because there is a social aspect that happens in the bars that you can't get anywhere else. But I do think that it's being having the opportunity to do that, things outside of the bar more, and maybe getting people to understand that it doesn't have to be an expensive thing. It can just be people getting together and talking and having a conversation like we're doing tonight. You know, I think that's really important. So I appreciate you brought that up, Jennifer, because that's one of my passions too, is intergenerational education.
Well, to that point, something that I would like to touch on before we get too close to the end is, because PFLAG includes parents and family, we've talked about different ways to, you know, try to integrate younger people into activities where they can feel safe, where they can feel like they are with the same kinds of people. But do you have any examples, either through your experience through PFLAG or personally, where You can cite some really strong allyship for some of the youngest people that you get to help support, like the families that you help support, because I think that's really important, an important part of what PFLAG as a whole does, but also, again, kind of to what we've been talking about, it seems as though even younger humans are able to be more themselves than ever before. So I think it's important to, if you can, speak to some great examples of how people have been supported from a younger age even.
I'll go last. Somebody else can talk now first.
I can, as a parent, I can talk to that. I was a foster parent for 12 years and I raised, I don't know how many kids. I couldn't even fathom. And I ended up with roughly 5. It just depends on who you ask. I adopted, there's 5 that stayed permanently. And one of the things that I tell parents, actually, I tell kids when I'm dealing with specifically teenagers, is just because your parents said something when you came out that sounded like hate, you need to cool your jets a little bit, because it doesn't mean what really sounds like hate or refusal to understand is really concern. So when you're a parent, kids, they do dumb stuff without any help, like they just do. And if there's one more thing that you can't control, which is someone coming out to you as LGBT plus, that's one more factor that's now placed in front of your child as an obstacle. So the reaction is often to say, are you sure? Or question it. And that's really okay, because that's a way of making sure that there's conversation. And a lot of kids, teenagers, they hear that they're questioning me, they don't believe me, they hate me, they don't believe me, they don't understand me. But really, they do, or they want to, but they're really having a conversation in their own head. So when I was coming out, I mulled coming out over since I was a child, I don't know, 6 or 7, probably when I knew something was different. But then I pop it on my parents when I'm 23, just boom. And of course they knew, they knew, but I've been rolling this around in my head for years. You got to give them a chance to catch up. And that's what I tell kids is give your parents a chance to wrap. They have to re-envision now your entire future to some extent. So there is a process they have to go through. Another thing I tell parents and teenagers is just because you come out as LGBT does not give you the right to not take no. So when you are a teenager and you say, Mom, I think might be bi, and I want to go dress like this to go to school, and your mom says, no, that's not safe. It's okay to say no to your child sometimes, because a part of our job is to keep kids safe until they can kind of wrap their heads around things. So that's what I tell people is just because a child comes out, just because a child has any number of things that they are that makes them a little bit different or unique from their classmates, you can still tell them no sometimes. It's okay. And the kids are smart, right? And they figure out real quick that they can hold that over mom's head. You're saying no to me because you hate who I am, and of course there are parents that are awful and don't really, but that's a thing that's kind of that thing that I talk to parents about is the best ally can be for your child is to really have concern, and don't, because you said something that hurt their feelings right away, don't stop. Like, don't go too far either way. Don't apologize so much the child now thinks that they can get away with murder, but also don't just stop trying because you're afraid to get it wrong, kind of like Eric said. So that's my process in dealing with parents or family members and kids, because I'm a parent and I know what it feels like to have a child come out. Even as a lesbian, when my son came out to me, my first concern is he could be in danger in his school. There's all these things, and my first instinct, and I've actually had to say this to young lesbians who talk to me, don't come out. Keep it under your hat. And I hate to say that, but sometimes if your education or your safety or your housing or your whatever is on the line, sometimes you got to keep it under your hat for another year or two. Like, it's just the only way you can be safe. And I hate to do that. And I didn't tell my son that. What I did was say, when you come out, make sure that you can trust that person. Like, don't just go telling the whole school. That's too dangerous. Luckily, nobody cared. Like, the school system was like, whatever, they don't care. But it's the hardest thing in the world as someone who's been out and very happy to be out for many years to say, you're gonna have to wait because your parents aren't safe. And I hate that. But that's how I can advocate, though, because sometimes if waiting a year will give that child a college education, they can keep their car, they have their health insurance, they have food and shelter for 1 more year or 2 more years. I mean, that's a really crappy thing to say. It's a really hard decision, but that's the truth of it. I hope that answered your question. Did I get off track?
That was great.
Great.
Yeah, so I think for me, my experience with parents, I'm not a parent, I don't have any children, but I've had a lot of parents that have come through transformations, and a lot of parents of trans kids who are coming through, and kind of like what Eric was saying earlier, they just don't understand. Like, they're trying to learn, and they are trying to understand, something that their child is going through. And like Jen had mentioned, when we come out as queer people, it's not just like we wake up one day, it was like, oh, you know what, I think I'm trans today, or I think I'm gay today, like it's something that we as individuals have been dealing with, for most likely our entire lives up until that point of like finally, getting there. And then, like Jen said, your parents have envisioned you as a certain way for your entire life, and now everything has to drastically change. And so I think that's been something that has been really heartening in terms of working with the transformations group. Is there have been some really just incredible parents that have come through that are amazing allies for their kids. They're amazing advocates for their kids, and they've come through to transformations and have learned a lot about what it means to be trans, and how to appropriately respect not just trans people, but how do I support my child in this? Because it is scary. It is scary to be part of a marginalized group. It's scary to have your kid be part of a marginalized group. And so it's been really, really empowering and really rewarding to have been able to work with some just really, really standout parents that have come to transformations and have really educated themselves and really put in the time and effort to say, I love my child. I don't understand. Like, I have no capacity to understand what they are going through, because that has not been my life experience. But they put in the work, and they put in the time and effort because it's their child, and they just love them. Like, that's the most important thing, is like, even though I don't understand what my child is going through, I still love them unconditionally. And it's important to me and to them to be able to treat them properly and treat them with respect. So I think that's definitely been one of the most rewarding aspects of being able to work with the transformations group, is really just seeing so many parents have very positive and healthy relationships with their queer and trans kids. It's really empowering to be able to see those relationships, and kind of like we had talked about, of older generations of queer people being able to see younger generations of queer people come out when they're younger, or be in a family environment where they are allowed to be themselves, where they're not afraid to come out to their parents, or to bring their partners home, or to wear whatever they want to wear. It's really exciting as an older queer person to be able to help create that environment for younger people.
Brett, I'm really glad that you mentioned all that, because I am just have initial kind of links to you guys now at the Transformation Center, and I'm amazed at some of the stuff I've already hearing coming from you tonight, and just stuff we talked about at the PFLAG meeting.
Yeah.
So last week I had the honor of being a part of the PFLAG meeting, and there were 3 parents there who all had some new transitional issues for themselves as parents, and with their kids being trans, and they were younger kids, and some of them, I think one was in junior high and another one was in high school. And I'd never really been close to those stories before. And sitting there amongst these three groups of parents and hearing the wins and also the heartbreaks about having a trans child was so eye-opening for me, even though I knew that they were going through some of the kinds of the same things that I would have gone through being in a minority group growing up. It's totally different because not only are they, I feel like it's different for me. What I went through is that they're not only having to identify themselves and learn about who they are in a world that doesn't really accept them yet, but also it's a whole other level of acceptance and understanding when you're talking about going from, in their mind or in their transformative, in the actual physical process of going from a male to a female or vice versa, or whatever their identity ends up being. And that adds up so many different levels that our world is not yet equipped to deal with for a lot of people. And so one of the things that came out of that meeting last week that I'm really excited about is those three parents that were there. They're all from the corridor area. They're not from Cedar Rapids, but I definitely hope that you and the people at Transformation that I can work with, I wanted to start, I've already started some other art groups, but I want to start like a transformative art group is what I'm calling it. So that we can, and because those parents there really wanted, they were really excited about an idea where they could sit in a room with their kids and the other parents who are going through all this and do some fun, just fun art that allows them to express themselves creatively, whether that's writing, art, painting, singing, poetry, writing, and sharing that with their parents in a safe place. I just feel like that will be so beneficial. And it's also selfish for me because I'm going to learn a lot being around those people. And I'm excited to bring my love and joy of art to an allyship that I think is so important. So I'm excited that I get to be a part of that group and hope that we can do some of that work going forward, because it sounds like it's something that's needed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, that sounds incredible. Yeah, I think that there would be, a number of families who would definitely benefit from something like that. So yeah, that sounds awesome.
We'll make it happen.
Right.
Well, we have every month we have the meetings, which are one part support and really 2 parts social. They're very social. So that is the first Wednesday of every month at the Artisan Sanctuary from 6 to 8. Very casual. We just meet, we talk, whatever people want to talk about. It can be important stuff, hard stuff, or it could be just fun stuff. And then Transformations meets the first and third Thursday of every month.
Yep, first and third Thursdays.
But as far as events go, and I would have to ask Emma, our webmaster, what she's doing. I don't know what we've got coming up. The Artisan Sanctuary will be working with PFLAG to put together stuff with Eric. With COVID, we were kind of a little bit on hold. I was planning a few things that had to be put on hold just for some personal reasons, and with COVID still a little goofy. So we'll see, but hopefully by summer we'll have some more social events, and maybe this winter if we feel. There's only 4 of us, so there's me, Brett,
that's incredible,
Corey, and we're tired. Like we're busy right now. Everybody's a little bit in flux with their life, so we're kind of like kicking back to see what we can handle here in the future, and we're really trying hard to recruit Bailey. So we're really trying hard to recruit like people to come on board and help. And people don't have to be on the board to help. People can just be a volunteer and they say, hey, I want to do an event, and you want to use the PFLAG name to support that. We're happy to listen to things and to help support that. We can help with space. We can help get donors, whatever it is that we can do to help. But we don't really have anything planned definite right now.
That sounds great.
And something else that I was really impressed with on the website, though, is that there are so many resources. I just looked up the PFLAG CR website real quickly. And for instance, like there's a whole link for local welcoming religious homes, right? I mean, something like that might be good, but there's health and wellness and all sorts of like just great resources. Like I had not considered like hair care for, like when you're transitioning, like that's a learning curve. Right?
Absolutely.
And
I would never have known that was something either. I wouldn't even thought of it. I just learned something tonight.
Right? So I think that, there are a lot of interesting resources that have, it's not just like a link to a website, but it has community resources too that might be helpful being new in and around Cedar Rapids. Bailey, and so all of you, our guests, thank you so much for speaking to your own experiences, being very, open with your own lives, and also the experience that you've had, demonstrating allyship and making our community stronger, better together. We really appreciate you all being here this evening. Thank you so much.
Yeah.